what's really tragic is they used to use women and kids. They'd strap IED vests to kids. They'd put a backpack full of explosives with toys around it and then blow the fucking thing up. Like, there was no remorse. There was no care for human life. They didn't give a shit. And they showed that. And they showed that in a real cruel way. And then you're going to get listeners who are going to go, well, that's really unfair of her to, judge a whole culture that way. And I'm not. I'm judging the extremist version that I fought against. And then there's also going to be the people that are going to say, well, you went to war. How would you feel if somebody kicked your door open in the middle of the night? I'm like, you're right. I'd blast a motherfucker with a shotgun. You're right. I don't want anyone kicking my door in.
Kelsi Sheren, thank you for joining me on the show.
No problem. Thank you so much for having me.
Of course. So I know you have a background in Taekwondo and rugby.
I do.
Can you talk to me a little bit about how competition has shaped you since you did that earlier on in your life, it sounds like? Because I'm super curious about that. I grew up playing baseball for about 5 years old to 23, but I never did any sort of martial arts until recently. So I'm curious how that shaped you.
For me, it was more of, I don't really remember it being much of a life before. I was 4 years old when I started fighting. I remember my mom came home from she was at the mall and they were doing this demonstration in the mall trying to recruit kids into it sounds really creepy now that you say it that way, but recruit people into the gym and things like that. And they were doing this huge I think they're breaking boards and, just stuff that would catch the attention of people. And she called me from a payphone and said, hey, do you want to try this? But the rule always has been, if you try something, you start something, you finish it. So if you're going to try it, you're going to commit to the minimum amount of time that we have to commit you to, and then we'll go from there. So I said yes, and I started at 4. My last fight was when I was, I think, roughly around, it was after Afghanistan, so I want to say around 20. And that was the last time I did a international level competition, which was the US Open in Las Vegas. But for me, I can't really remember a life without sports. I think sport has always given me a place to thrive and grow, but also the beautiful thing is it helped shape me in a way that allowed me to feel in control of myself and feel in control of situations. So whether that's through discipline and holding myself accountable for things, sport for me really was the thing that kept my life on the tracks. And I think it is for a lot of people, especially martial arts being so centered around different types of cultures and the way they do their discipline. For me, Taekwondo was a Korean sport. So when my grandmasters came over from Korea, they were serious. They didn't mess around. There was no, hugs and take it easy. It was, if I fucked up, he literally would back kick me through a wall. So it's
Wow.
real, but it kept my head above water. It kept me out of trouble. And sport really gave me the ability to believe in myself from a young age.
Yeah, the consequences of messing up in the world of baseball are much less than the world of messing up in martial arts, Muay Thai, Jiu-Jitsu, Taekwondo. And I grew up having learned that you typically do better when you control your breathing in competition. Things tend to come more naturally. You relax, you feel just more in control. And then a few years ago during the pandemic, I started practicing Muay Thai, and just for the first time feeling that feeling during the first sparring session of feeling out of control and getting hit in the face. And I'm like, this is not just a normal tussle in the locker room. This is not a bar fight in college. Someone is accurately and methodically picking me apart. And if I don't do something, I'm just going to get hit in the face or kicked in the ribs. And it really, you're talking about feeling out of control. That was a very scary feeling at first. And I still get that before sparring and rolling and stuff like that. But that first feeling of being thrown into the deep end and trying to defend yourself, I can't imagine doing that at 4, 5 years old, even as a teenager. That sounds like a pretty rough but effective way to learn being in control.
Well, I think the other thing that was really beautiful about Taekwondo for me was it gave me a community of individuals outside of school and my family. It gave me something else to lean on, conversations that I could have. It gave me a safe space to grow and be how I wasn't anywhere else. I could be aggressive there. My aggression was beneficial there. In school and other things, it was not beneficial. It couldn't be utilized as a tool, but they knew how to mold it into a tool. And I very quickly rose in the ranks, and I very quickly started competing at a high level. I think the first time I fought, I got my black belt at 11. I had my second degree before I was 13. And that's all I did, though. In the morning, I would train. After school, I would train. Sometimes at lunches, depending on if I was going to a national or not, I would train. You would be in weight classes from a very young age. So having to cut weight at the age of 12 is a hard thing to do. And it's really, really hard on the body. It's similar to gymnastics. When you're young, if you start messing with weight, it can have long-term damages for sure. But that being said, I wouldn't change or trade it for the world. The only thing I would trade would be the discipline. I would have preferred something along the lines of jiu-jitsu that's actually practical in everyday application rather than Taekwondo, which is a striking sport. It's less applicable in real life. Say if someone were to grab you on a street, then it would, it depends obviously on the outfit, because if I'm wearing high heels and a dress, I'm not kicking somebody in the face as effectively as I would be if I was in sweatpants and pair of running shoes. But with jujitsu, or even judo, it's way more applicable, or boxing, it's way more applicable. Taekwondo is applicable in the sport itself, and there is some defense aspects to it, don't get me wrong, but from a real life skill, I wish I would have spent, most of my life developing maybe jujitsu instead of Taekwondo.
Yeah, I agree with that in the aspect that it's if someone approaches you violently, if someone starts swinging at you or pushing you, grappling gives you the skill to de-escalate that without incurring damage on the other person.
Right.
And also being able to control the situation and not taking damage or as much damage on yourself in most situations. But I don't know. I haven't been in, anything besides a 20-second shoving brawl, whether it's a baseball field or a bar, like nothing that I would call a street fight. Like when I watch videos of street fights on YouTube, I haven't been in a situation that looks like that. It's been just very quick. And I could see the benefit of being able to tie someone up and being able to choke someone. But also a lot of those situations, it does seem like when someone is successful, it's like a very quick punch and run, like a strike and run. And if you are grappling with someone, you get control with the less space that's between you. So that would be my concern, is that if I'm grappling with someone, my number one strategy is to exit as quickly as possible. And that may be difficult if you're in a position where you're wrapped up, as opposed to striking and creating distance.
It depends, because it depends on the situation, the application you're using it for. If you think of something like a street fight, of course you want to, the quickest thing you want to do is de-escalate and possibly hit and move. It's no different than the military. Shoot and move. You don't want to stay in the same position if you don't have to. That being said, for the profession that I was in previously, having grappling and jujitsu, if you're close enough to somebody that you're using grappling and jujitsu in my last profession, then there better be a finish with a knife or something, because you're not fighting people that you want to walk away from. If you're that close to an enemy fighter, it's going to end bad for one of you, no matter what. There is no walk away from that, unless you've taken the other human out.
Yeah, no, and we'll get into this for sure, but for people who are not aware, you served in Afghanistan, you were in the Canadian Armed Forces, and you are dealing with situations in the extremes that are way beyond the average extremes that people were dealing with, on a street fight in Brooklyn, per se. Like you said, you're not looking to walk away from those people because those people are the enemy. Is there an instance that stands out in your mind where grappling entered the situation and that was the primary mode of leading to taking care of that target? Like you disarmed that, or you ended it through grappling?
I was attacked by a female once, but it
Mm.
didn't end in grappling. The closest I ever came to something along those lines is when she attacked me with scissors, and I just used a buttstock instead of lethal form.
Mhm.
Um, other than that, I know there are individuals in my community that have utilized things like rocks and other really horrific ways, but it's been life or death. And I know of their
Mhm.
stories. Their stories are not mine to tell, but there are definitely people who have had incidents like that. Speaking of someone, I had Stuart Scheller on the show yesterday, and we were talking about the first time he had taken someone's life with a rifle, and it was point blank. I mean, it happens. It does happen. But fortunately enough, the closest I have ever been was enough to see them from eye to eye to know how far they were to shoot. But the thing about Afghanistan was very tricky is because a lot of the fighters, the majority of the fighters, they dress like civilians. So you could be in a compound where you know that that guy standing right beside you is an active Taliban member, but if they're not trying to harm you at that time, you can't do anything about it. So I have been close to enemy fighters in that sense, but I've never needed to utilize any hand-to-hand. And to be completely straightforward with you, if that were the case, I don't know I would have walked out alive from it just because of the way that my kit fit at the time. I was quite bulky and I'm only 5 foot. So it wasn't go fast kit where it was less is more is less. And, it was issued kit from the Canadian Army. So it didn't fit me properly. And my arms were about out to here. So it would have been an issue for sure.
So when you're on the ground in Afghanistan and you know that someone is in the Taliban, but they're not engaging you,
Mm-hmm.
you wouldn't be able to engage that person until they do something or step to you or something that you view as trying to cause a problem.
Yeah, the Geneva Convention's pretty strict about enemy combatants and what can be applicable at the time. Pretty much unless they're shooting at you or actively trying to set an IED or something along those lines, you're not going to be able to apply lethal force.
Is that good for the most part? Like, how
I
did
don't
you
know. How
feel
did
about that?
Afghanistan end?
Not great.
Exactly. It's because there's different ways. It's hard to win against an enemy when the enemy isn't using rules, right? So, oh, there's an Amber Alert. I'm so sorry. I just got an
No,
Amber
no,
Alert on my phone. 1 second.
no, go ahead.
We've been having quite a few weird little things like that lately. So, my apologies.
No worries at all. I'm well aware that remote podcasting comes with its own unique set of difficulties.
That's okay. I feel you on
Yeah.
that.
Yeah. So going back to Afghanistan, obviously things not going well is an understatement. I'm just trying to visualize, like, even have a slice of what you were experiencing or what it must be like to try to defeat an enemy within a set of rules that they have no interest or no, like they don't even know about the rules or they don't even care. Like, there are no rules. Like, how do you
I don't
even,
care.
yeah, how do you even approach, like it's like playing basketball with someone that's fucking rifling tennis serves at you. Like, you're not even playing the same game. Like, how do you even approach that?
Well, I mean, I'm a little over my skis on this one, but I will tell you from my point of view, you approach it at the way that you approach it, meaning what you're told to do, what you can and cannot do, and you don't go outside those lines. Whatever that means, that could mean that there's a target, that they've done something wrong, you've seen it before, you see them again, but they're not actively doing something wrong then. So you can't engage, or like you can't, if somebody's not directly shooting at you, you can't directly shoot at them. And those rules change throughout the war, meaning Canada changed their rules of engagement, I think around 2006, 2007, when they became less of a support mission and more of a fighting force, meaning we were allowed to shoot, we were allowed to engage the enemy in a different way. And so for me, I was very young in my military service when I deployed, so I was really relying on a lot of the staff members around me to say, hey, yes, we shoot here, hey, we don't. But then when I went outside the wire with the British, I was on my own. I was my own command. And so I took into account what I thought would be right, what I thought would be wrong, and I did my best to act as safely and professionally as I could during that time. But things happen in war that are results of war. It's not the thing that I have a hard time with now is when people ask me questions like that, it's depending on who you're talking to, they're looking for a specific answer. They're looking for I would never harm someone. I would never hurt another human being. I would never do that. And the reality is, if you haven't been in those situations, of course you wouldn't do that. You could never fathom harming another human being. You could never fathom truly taking someone off the face of the earth. But if that's never been in your life or never been presented to you, of course you're not going to think that. So depending on who I talk to is depending on the depths in which I go, because no civilian wants to sit here and hear me talk about dropping 100-pound rounds on cities. It's not like a comforting feeling to think that that's what our military does. But when called upon, we will go and do the work that needs to be done in order to save our people.
It's not comforting, but there are a lot of great conversations that are discomforting, and it's still valuable to go to those places. And from someone like me who's a civilian, I've never been close to the horrors and anything that's involved with being in battle, being in war. I'm aware of the nature of war. I can't grasp what that involves from a body and mind standpoint and a spirit standpoint to what that does for a person. But I do find it, interesting and meaningful to talk about in a non-judgmental way of just what's actually happening. What are you doing? What can't you do? What is the enemy looking for? What aren't they looking for? How are they reacting? All these different situations, like the Geneva Convention, the rules for different countries, like how they're operating and things like that. I think we'd be better off if civilians were aware of all of those different limitations that soldiers have to comply with.
You would think that would be the correct response, but you have to also put yourself in other shoes where they have never experienced something. I've heard someone say, and I say it all the time now because I think it's brilliant, the worst thing that's ever happened to you is the worst thing that's ever happened to you. So if you go to, say, for example, I'm not sure where you're located.
I'm in Brooklyn, New York.
Okay. So you're on the East Coast, you're in New York. There's some violence there, depending on where you go. Just it's a big city, it's part of it. But say you go to somewhere like LA. Myself and some of the shows I do in LA, we don't have these conversations because those conversations that are had can get really, really nitty gritty, deep and dark. And the thing that they don't want to hear that. They don't want to hear what it's like when you do something for the first time. They don't want to hear what it feels like, looks like, or smells like, because then they have to wrap their brain around the idea that there's people out there willing to do that. Now, willing to do it in order to keep you safe, but that doesn't cross their mind. What crosses their mind is that can be a really violent person. When that's just not the truth. We're just all cut from a different cloth, and what we can handle individually is very different. So I agree with you. And that's what I do on my show. Hard conversations need to be had. They need to be had in a real, raw way where somebody feels like it doesn't matter how gross or nitty gritty or dark it gets. There's a space, you hold space for that conversation. But like I said, people think they want to know until they know. That's also the truth of the matter. Some people think they want to know until they know. And what I always respond to with that is if you really wanted to know, you should have gone and done it. But people don't, because if you really were to put yourself in the position of some of the service members that I know, most people would never have made it out alive, let alone survived afterwards.
When did you start to realize that you were cut from the different cloth? Like when you were going through your childhood, you were competing. When did you start to realize that you were one of those people who was willing to find out?
I've always known that. My mom always told me that from a young age. We didn't use the can't word. That was not allowed in the house. That was the real C word to her. And so,
Yeah,
we
that
never,
was more offensive.
yeah, well, I mean, I still say the other one, but I think, I think I've always known, and not in the sense of like, oh, I've always known who I am. I've always known because my mother and father always made me know that I was different, and not in a bad way. But they never shut down the amount I talked, or they never shut down my ideas of wanting to be great and being great in something, whatever that was. They were willing to support it. And so when it was Taekwondo, and I was 6 years old and said I'm going to the Olympics, there was no like, you can't do that. It was like, okay, what do you need to do it? Let's go. So whether or not people are taught that, or they have the opportunity to have parents as beneficial and as supportive as I had, I knew a long time. My teachers used to tell me, she's got a big voice, she's got a big personality. They used to say to my mom, like, don't shut it down. Yeah, it's annoying. It's hard to teach. It's loud in class. It can be disruptive, but she's going to utilize that someday. And then when I moved through school, I never, I got along. I had friends. I did all of those, we all have those problems in high school and things like that. But the difference was for me is I never thought I would settle in the town I lived in. I never thought that would be enough for me. It was never enough for me. I'm a person who looks forward, and I dream big, and I think big, and I really do. I've had to learn the hard way that not everybody thinks the way I think. Not everybody strives for excellence the way I do. And it's not to say that I'm different or better than anyone. I just believe in it. I believe in myself. I believe in my ability to achieve whatever the fuck I want. And the difference is a lot of people say it, but they don't actually feel it. And I felt that from day one. I'm no different than anybody else. I just had a really good upbringing to be told that I could do anything. So quite literally, my brain has been developed to tell me and believe that I can do whatever I want.
So that feeling of knowing that you can do whatever you want, that was aligned with the soldier track as long as you can remember? Or was it just the feeling of knowing you could do whatever you want, and then there was an event or a period of time where you had this engine running, and then that was placed on going into the armed forces, and then that became the direction?
For me, the military was never even in my eye line, wasn't even the purview. Didn't have a clue about it, didn't think about it, didn't want anything to do with it. It just wasn't. It wasn't. My parents figured I'd end up being a cop or something along those lines, which still more A-type personality, more forceful type individual, somebody a little more driven. But the idea of working for someone else, or the idea of a traditional job, never crossed my mind. I didn't know what I wanted to be when I was older. I just knew I wasn't going to go work for someone else at a store doing X, Y, and Z. I don't do well with bosses, and I don't do well with being told what to do. That was a struggle for me in the military at first, until I understood why I was being told what I needed to do. But for me, up until the point of actually joining the service, I figured I'd be an athlete my entire life. I thought I'd be a professional athlete my entire life. I never planned on stopping my sport until that was an abrupt stop for me without my choice. And then I took a handful of years off and started fighting again when I joined the military. So I had plans to go to school, get on a scholarship for rugby or for a major sport. Like, I had plans to be an athlete, and that's really whatever sport I wanted. I knew I wanted to thrive in it. So that's what the goal was. But like I said, plans change, and you're meant to go down the direction you're meant to go down. Sometimes you don't realize it at the time.
So the dreams of becoming a professional athlete, having that ripped away, created this space, and then eventually somewhere in that space, you made the decision to go towards the Army.
Yeah, I made the decision. I had one of those, what you would call like everybody has like their first love breakup or whatever you think it is in high school, right? That just like traumatizes you. And I wanted out of the town I was in. So I picked up the first program that I knew a college would possibly accept me for with the grades that I had. And I went off to that. And that's where I decided to join the military not long after. So the idea of being an athlete changed really quickly. And, to be honest with you, it took a long time to figure out who I was after that. just because it left such a void.
Yeah, so when I had baseball taken away from me at 23 years old, not by my own choice, that was like a soul reckoning. And I don't know, there's something about having your whole life dedicated towards one point, and then every time you think forward, you're always standing in that point. For me, I was standing on a professional baseball mound in the MLB from 5 years old to 21, 22, until I had a couple nerve surgeries, and then I was just a shitty pitcher. That was the reality of it. Like, I just was not someone who could leverage my skills to that level after having surgery, and just the track that laid out before me. There was like the reality that I told myself I was going to commit to, and the reality that was actually happening right now. And it's obviously, we both had entirely different experiences of where we chose to go with that. But I just remember sitting there, you know, at the end of my college career in the baseball house, feeling like I was absolutely fucking nothing, like worthless, because my entire worth was tied to baseball. And it took me a really long time to figure out another skill and figure out who I was, because everyone telling me things in the moment, like, it's okay, man. Like, you're still like, you're still a good friend. Like, you're still, fun. You're still like all this shit, like just in and out of my head, like didn't mean shit. All I wanted to do was feel like I did when I was throwing a baseball hard, and I couldn't get that feeling back. And so, yeah, you talking about having your competitive career end just made me think about that hole that exists when you just have no idea where the fuck to go from that point.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's not an ideal one, but you either figure it out or you don't. And that's the thing. If you don't have support around you, sometimes that can become a really deep, dark hole very quickly.
So at what point did you enlist? You said you went to college for a little bit before that?
Yeah, I went for about 2 months. And then I enlisted, I swore in December of 07, and I was in basic training in January of 08.
What is basic training like? Like, can you give me the rundown of the things that are involved with that?
Yeah, and I'm assuming most of your listeners are American, so bear with me. It's not quite the same as the US, but for us, we kind of all go to one location as opposed to America. There's multiple different locations you can go for basic, and depending on your trade. So for us, we all go to this place called Saint-Jean, Quebec. And it's this, we call it the Mega. It's this massive concrete structure that is just filled with yelling and marching and sucking. It hurts and it's fun at the same time. It's meant to challenge you. I'm not sure how many weeks it was. I believe when I was in, it was 12 or 13-week program. And, the first little bit is just yelling at you and screaming at you and transitioning you from a civilian into a military member, learning how to march, learning how to salute, learning the customs, learning, all of the lovely nitty-gritty things about your uniform, folding socks, them tossing your rooms up and down, kicking shit out the windows, waking up at 4 a.m., going for your long runs, doing your PT, being in class, learning your weapon. It's just learning the culture really of the military, and it turns you into a basic soldier. You can march, you can ruck, you can carry, you can run, you can lift, you can shoot, but that's, just the beginning of it. That doesn't make you a full-blown soldier. After that, you go off to your trade-specific training and your weapon handling. So once you get through basic, if you can get through basic, you always have people who drop out. It's just part of it. They can voluntary release while they're in it. If you can make it through that, then you move on to your next phase, and then your next phase, and then you get posted out to a regiment, which is your unit. So for me, it went really quick. We were in wartime. Canada was very involved in Afghanistan at this point, and we were rotating every 6 to 8 months units all across the country over there. So I knew very well, very early. Even when I went to sign up, they said, we're involved in an active war, so you will be deploying. It's just a matter of wherever you get posted when they are on that rotation. So for me, I went really quick. I did basic training right after basic. I got sent out to Gagetown, New Brunswick. And I did my SQ and DP1, which is all your machine guns, your grenades, your Carl Gustav rocket launchers, your, what else did we do there? Mortars, grenades. I don't think we even did mortars yet. It was grenades, machine guns, other rifles, some handguns, Carl Gustav, stuff like that. And then once you're done that training, you move on to your trade specific. So for me, I stayed in Gagetown because I was an artillery gunner, and that's where the artillery school is. Well, at least one of them is, but that's the one that I was at. W Battery there, and the school is there. So you do another 4 weeks of training on the howitzers and the mortars, and that's when you become a gunner. And it's a 105 LG howitzer that you use for training. It shoots a 40-pound round with one of those big silver casings, brass casings that kicks out the back. And you can run it with 2 people. It's a smaller gun. And that's what you do your training on. Once you're done that training, you get posted to your regiment. And then that's when I got sent to Vaquietse, Quebec.
Were you directed towards artillery gunning, or was it a choice of multiple paths laid out and you were like, I'm doing artillery gunning?
No. So for me, when you joined, you had to pick an MOS. So you had to pick something that you were joining up for. For me, I joined artillery. I wanted infantry. Canada, for the longest time, we've always had women as combat arm roles, armored infantry or artillery or EOD. So for me, I could pick, and every single one of them needed people, but they drove me towards what they thought would be the best chance at success moving through the program all the way. So I ended up going artillery and learned the 105s. And then when you got posted to regiment, that's when we switched over to the big guns. And those are the guns we were actually firing in Afghanistan, which were 155 millimeter howitzers. So they're called the M777s. They can go upwards of, let me correct myself. The 105s shoot up to 20 kilometers. The 155s shoot up to maximum, I think 40, 37 recorded. And they're vicious, and they're 100-pound round, just under 100 pounds. They don't have a casing, and they take a lot of people to run.
Yeah. I was going through some artillery gunning YouTube videos and images, and those things look fucking nasty. Like there's a beauty to it when you see everyone loading it. Like I'm just
dance.
I don't know all the technical terms involved with it, obviously, but just seeing what goes on video, and then you launch it, and then it goes boom, and then there's just like this quiet. It's sometimes
we fire for effect, meaning we get calls for 10, 20 rounds down range. So you run that thing until you're done, and then they'll just say 10 rounds, fire for effect, meaning go as fast as you possibly can. And you just keep going until you're down. And then you wait to hear the all clear or mission success. And then you wait for another fire mission. So it can be a lot of sitting around, but it can also be a lot of firing, just depending on what's going on downrange.
So the basic training, repetitive shooting, is that an actual tactic you would use in war, or is that more just training you to do it really fast? So you're doing it like 10 times in a row, like really fast back to back?
No, you use that in war. Listen, artillery is used most of the time. We use all different types of rounds depending on the situation downrange, and what's called for is depending on the type of ammunition that's used. So, for example, HE, just high explosive. You're just destroying what's underneath. That's being used, if you've got, you're getting enemies moving in close and you need to push back, you start firing. And so the infantry have an individual that's attached to them from artillery. The Americans and the British, I think the British call them fisters. I think the Americans call them fisters, but we call them FOOs, forward observation officers. And they are attached to the infantry. And when things go awry or they need support, those artillery officers make a call to our comms. Our comms then feed that out to our guns, and then our guns fire for the support. So I've said this before on other shows, but it was explained to me this way. So I didn't coin this by any means, but somebody explained this to me. It's like they're like the hand of God. They will reach out and touch you from the sky, and you won't know it's coming until it's too late. And it's true. When you shoot those things, sometimes it's one round and then you don't shoot again. And sometimes it's literally 20, 30, 40 rounds downrange. If something's really going wrong and somebody really needs support, you're giving everything you've got. And you're not the only gun. They go in sets of 2. So I'm with a gun, and then there's another gun just just, maybe 50 feet, 100 feet, 200 feet, depending on where your fob looks like, right beside you doing the same damn thing. So if they call a 20 round fire mission for each of you, that's 40 rounds of hell coming down on you. And it doesn't have to be HE. It could be a loom. You could be lighting up the sky so that you guys can see, so that the people underneath you can see what's going on. It could be, there's frag rounds that explode in the air and rain down shrapnel. And then there's things like white phosphorus, which is only used when it's really necessary. And Canada does not use it on civilians or on any sort of, we don't use it on people. It's basically used in a really bad situation to put a blanket between you and the enemy, because white phosphorus burns. It doesn't stop burning, right? So if something like, for an example, white phosphorus is only really used in a situation where if the enemy's getting really, really close and it's going to get messy, they put a blanket up. Or if somebody's gone missing and they need to put a blanket up of support, you'll drop white phosphorus. But it's very rare. Canada, like I said, doesn't use them that I know of. But I know Americans have used them. I believe British have used them. I know Canada has used them. I don't talk about that.
Yeah. The hand of God is terrifying. But also there's like this spirituality, awe aspect. If someone describes, if I didn't know you were describing an artillery gun and you just said, yeah, the thing that I'm working with is the hand of God, I would be like, is that the Old Testament or the New Testament? Like, it sounds like the Old Testament for sure, like fucking raining fire down on some village for, disobeying, and God's just like, fuck this, I'm gonna turn you all into salt pillars, I'm gonna burn this entire city down. But then there's also like, you're witnessing an act of God, so all this destruction is coming from this being that's, supposed to be perfect. So this is like the perfect way to get rid of someone.
It's like a fire-breathing dragon that is the most beautiful. It's the most beautiful thing I've ever used and seen used. It is a dance. It's a form of art. It is, when it's done correctly and a unit is running efficiently on a gun and everyone knows their roles and everybody knows the movements and the pacing and the timing, and it really is methodical, but it is honestly one of the most beautiful things I've ever seen when a gun is run efficiently and effectively. It is fantastic. But then also what's really great is I've been underneath artillery, just like a lot of people have. And when you hear it come over top of you, it sounds like thunder and lightning. So it really is, when you hear that, it's already too late.
So like a crack almost?
Yeah, like a crackle. So like in World War II and the Vietnam and all of those, they would use the guns and they would sound like a whistle and pop. So the one of those, right? So you don't necessarily hear that anymore. Like, we're not using the same guns. There's a way to make that work, make that noise when you're using like an old howitzer. You just loosen the fuse on it and it leaves a gap so it whistles. But we don't have that. We don't do that. I've never heard it, at least personally, on a 777. So forgive me if somebody says they have. I haven't. But you're underneath and it is a crackle. It's like a thunder. It sounds like this rumbling that's coming. And once it hits, it shakes everything around you.
When you're underneath it, or at the times when you were underneath it, is that in training? Is that in battle? Like, when would it be beneficial for you to be underneath something like that?
Well, no artillery gunner is supposed to be underneath it. I was being borrowed by another unit doing a different job. So it was actually, when I was with the British, I found out 2 weeks ago, it was one of my regiment units that was firing support for us. And I'm glad and also terrified, because I know some of those people that were running it, and I go, but they didn't hit us, so that's great. So, but it is, for me, I had never witnessed being underneath ordnance coming your direction. So I was grateful they landed where they landed, but there's no feeling like it when it lands on the ground and it does what it's meant to do. It is exhilarating to see how beautiful it looks from the other side.
Yeah, that's darkly hilarious. Like, you're thinking, I hope Joe's not on this shift because his hands are a little bit shaky.
Oh man, listen, we're all imperfect humans and we all
Yeah.
make mistakes. And so mistakes have happened before. I was
Yeah.
just fortunate that I had competent gunners on those guns and I'm grateful to them.
Yeah. So I'm gonna put photos and videos up of the artillery gun in the video, but could you just describe the height and sort of the shape, how it looks for people that are only listening, just so they can have a scalable idea of how big the actual gun is?
Well, that's a great question. I wish I had a better answer for you. I don't know because I'm terrible at sizes like that. So if you're thinking 155 millimeter round, so if I were to stand up and I'm 5 foot tall, it goes up to my waist, and it's just under 100 pounds. That's just the bullet that's landing. That's not
Two
the fuse.
2.5 feet, 100
hmm
pounds. That seems like a bullet that God would use.
Yeah, exactly. And
Yeah.
then behind it is the fuse, is the charge bags, and the charge bags. Oh, I don't know, the size of my torso at least, and
Mhm.
they're numbered 1 to 7, and depending how far you want that round to go is depending on how many charge bags you put behind the
Mhm.
round, and then from there the breech gets closed, and then after the breech is closed, and then you prime it, meaning there is a small part on the gun near the breech where you have to pull the lever down, and once you pull it down, it activates the gun, meaning it can be fired. Then you wait for the call to fire from the sergeant that's running the guns, and then somebody grabs a big piece of rope on the left hand side of the guns, puts it to their waist and turns their body halfway, and then that'll
Mm.
fire the gun. So I wish I had a better explanation. My thing to your listeners, if you're listening, would be to just type in M777 in Google, and that will give you a full. You're going to get more war footage now than you would
Yeah.
have got in a long, long time, because it is cool to watch. There's a really great a friend of mine. Two of them that run Instagrams. One's called Veteran with a Sign, and the other one's called Real Eric Bartel. On Instagram, they have great footage. They repost a lot of really amazing footage of people firing guns to really great music, and the edits are incredible.
Yeah. No, I think that's super important because, I don't want to speak for the general public, but when I hear the word artillery gun, that means so many things in my mind. And then I looked it up and I'm like, oh, this is what this is. This is
hmm
the shape. This is what it fires. Artillery to me was kind of just this general term that covered a broad stroke of things. And then when I actually watched the video, it gave me something tangible, at least to picture in my
hmm
mind when I hear stories about it, or if I see something on Instagram and I'm like, oh, that's an artillery gun. So
Yeah.
I'll definitely check out those accounts.
And Veteran with a Sign's a great one. Real Eric Bartel's a great one for that. But the thing that I always, when I joined the military and they would be like, "What are you going in the army for?" I'd say artillery, and they would go, "I don't know what that is," and then I would just go, boom. Think of World War II. It's a version
Yeah.
of that. It's just a much larger, aggressive version.
Yeah. So you mentioned that there are two guns working in
Always
tandem, and then there's a team for each gun.
correct.
How many people for each gun? What is like the process of getting the information, putting it
Oof.
in, like it if it's just like general, that's perfectly okay. I'm just interested in when you're giving coordinates and you have to blow up that spot. I can't, I can't picture how that works
How it
so
works.
accurately, like accurately, not just work, but like that you can hit,
Pinpoint.
yeah, that you could hit this cylinder block as opposed to the one 5 feet to the right. Like that to me is just mind blowing.
To have accuracy like that, you need a round called the Excalibur, which is a $500,000 round that, when it's opened, has to be used in a certain amount of time, and it's GPS targeted. So for your listeners, if you want to see this, now that's a really cool thing to witness. An Excalibur round, just type in Excalibur artillery. This round is fantastic. Now, I generally try to stay away from giving a explanation exactly down to the point, because I learned my lesson on Lex Friedman that when I mess up, the whole internet hates me. So
Mm.
I'm going to try to give it an overview here. So what you have, like I stated before, is you have a foo or a fister, which is up with the infantry. Okay. They've got their maps with them, and they're going to call a grid coordinate. on the radio. That's going to go to your comms tent, which then has your officers in them. Those officers are then going to plot that on a grid. They're going to give us that grid. And what they're going to do is they're going to call a fire mission. So we could be off doing something in the fob or whatever, kind of waiting, showering, working out, whatever it is you're doing, OP tower. And then you'll hear something. You'll hear like an alarm or a sound or whatever your unit uses. And somebody yells fire mission. And then like little rats, you see us all run out to the guns. And we all run to different positions depending on your job. Then you have your sergeant and your 2IC, which are often master bombardiers or bombardier chef in French. And the bombardier chef is telling everyone where to move. And the sergeant is the one who's talking with the officers in the comms tent. They're then giving us the coordinates, and then the sergeant is relaying them to the person who is on the sights. So then they get on the big arms. There's one that makes that gun go up and down and one that makes it go left and right. And they're plotting the grids, and we're setting it up to that position. And then what's happening is they're telling us which type of rounds to have ready. So then the 2IC is then telling the other individuals, say 10 rounds HE, and we're going to fire for effect, or 10 rounds HE, 30 second in between. And they'll give us specifics all the way down to 10 rounds, 2 minutes in between, but fire for effect. So you shoot a round, and then the sergeant watches his watch for 2 minutes and then goes fire. And then we hold for another 2 minutes and then we go fire. So there's a way you can do it. It's not always just rounds down range. And then what happens after that is, like I said, everybody knows their job on the gun. So once the comms have already come down, the sergeant has already relayed the coordinates, and then we already know the ammunition that's needed. Everybody sits and waits, and everyone knows their job at that point.
Yeah, so that really is like a dance. It's like a recital, because there's multiple dance partners and multiple dances going on at the same time. And
you're not always running the same part of the gun either. So depending on who gets there first, sometimes just will depend on where you end up.
Yeah, bombardier chef sounds like
master bombardier.
Master bombardier, you're just serving people what they asked for.
That's pretty much what their job is. Their job is to make sure the sergeants get what needs to be done, because in our world it goes gunner, bombardier, master bombardier, and then sergeant. And so the sergeant and the master bombardier are the ones that are in charge of the guns. And then you've got your lieutenants and your captains running the inside of the comms tents, which are communicating with the FOOs who get the coordinates from them.
So being 5 feet tall, does that limit you in terms of what you can actually, what role you can perform on the gun? Because obviously it's a big piece of equipment.
No, you just have to be strong enough.
Has that ever been a limiting factor for other things in the Army, the height, or is it like an annoyance for gear or things like that?
It's a big annoyance for gear. Yeah, that's the only part I'll squawk about. I've always been a big believer of, especially when the United States started welcoming women into the combat arms roles, they started doing the 2 standards, which irritate me and I believe are wrong. And I've been very vocal about that. And a lot of women take issue with that. But I believe if you can't do the same amount of push-ups, the same amount of run, the same amount of pull-ups, the same amount of anything, then you have no business doing that job. It's nothing sexist. That's just the reality, because people will come back to you and say, well, that's not fair. Everyone should have the opportunity. You're right. You do have the opportunity. Now show up. It's that simple. So for me, I was very fortunate to have a staff member, Sergeant. He's now a captain, Captain Mark LeBlond. He's in Gagetown now. I was actually with him 2 weeks ago. And he told me right to my face when I got to the guns, I don't want you here. Because I looked small and I looked weak and I looked like I couldn't do it. And then I started showing up and proving myself. If you can do the job, you will get the respect. It's nothing more complicated than that. So he would take me to the gym and he would show me ways to improve my strength when it came to loading the rounds. Because those rounds are, at the time, they were the same weight as me. So it was about technique, not necessarily about how big and bulky you were. If you knew the technique to pick up a round and lift it and load it, you're fine. So I was lucky enough to have staff. Once he saw that I could do it, he invested time into me and he quickly changed his tune as in working with me. And fortunately enough, he now says I'm one of the best gunners he's ever worked with because I show up no matter what. And I think that's the same with any other job. If you show up and you put the effort in and you work hard towards it, and if you can't do it at the time, but you go and you do the best you can to make it so that you can do the job, people will respect that.
Was that a tactical move on his part to tell you that
No.
I don't want you here? Or was he legitimately like, get the fuck out of here?
You
It
could
wasn't a
talk to him now.
motivational thing.
No, there was no motivation. He barely spoke English. He did not want me there.
Okay. Yeah. So with the little English he had, he was able to tell you to get out of
Very
here.
clear. Yeah, he was very clear because 5 of us got, I think it was 4 or 5 of us got posted after Gagetown to these units, to Vaquetier, and none of us spoke French. And they were an all French unit. So they had a bunch of English people come in who they now had to train on things in a weapon system that we didn't fully understand. And we had to learn it in a separate language. And then we were deploying, we got there in September, we deployed in April. So we had a very short time frame to really wrap our heads around it. And he did a really good job. Once he saw that I was willing to put the effort in and show up and do the job, then that's when the tune changed. But when you have, I wasn't even 19 when I went to him. I was 18 when I got to him. This tiny 18-year-old, like many people, when you see that and you're in this position, if you don't know what that person's capable of prior, you don't know if they're going to be able to be utilized on the gun properly. So for me, it was just about showing up like I do everywhere else, putting everything I have into it, and then let that do the talking.
Yeah. And the thing you said before about having a broad qualification for men and women for doing the same amount of push-ups, sit-ups, running time, whatever it is, that makes total sense, because there are a lot of guys that can't do 20, 30 push-ups, whatever it is. So if you're able to meet those physical qualifications and then you can perform the job, I don't see a reason why you should get rid of those qualifications for a certain group of people. Just like whoever meets it, and that makes it easy.
I do struggle with that, and I have a lot of pushback from that from a lot of women who are like, well, that's not fair. How could you say that? You're a woman. It's like, well, because if you haven't been outside the wire and you haven't seen someone hurt and you haven't had to pull them out of something or do something or whatever, you become a liability. It's that simple. You could be a man and useless. You're still going to be a liability if you can't do the job. And I'm not saying I did the job perfect, and I'm not saying I did the job better than anyone else, but I could do the job. That's it. The minimum was just do the job.
Yeah. And you can also point to clear things where you need to demonstrate a certain level of physicality, where you have to lift up a 40-pound, 100-pound round. And so if you can't meet certain basic things to do that, no matter who you are, there's a clear line to, okay, you can't perform this task. Like, it's not a sexist thing. It's like, we need you to be someone reliable in the heat of battle, because other people are relying on you too. And if you can't do that, then it's just not the right job. That would be my thinking on it. Yeah, it's not safe.
But you become a liability. It's really not more complicated than that. And like, don't get me wrong, there's other positions on the guns that you can do that aren't loading rounds. Like, I didn't load rounds as often as maybe some of the other guys did. I was doing other parts of the gun. But when it came to, if it was necessary, loading rounds is something I had to do. And it's not, I didn't love it. You're not carrying them from too far, but that gets tiresome,
Yeah.
and it's part of the job regardless. I loved every aspect of that gun, and it didn't matter to me what aspect I was doing. It was fun. I enjoyed it.
What were some of the exercises that you had to do in order to be able to lift the rounds better?
So really simple stuff, but seems like, how could that work? So what he would do, my sergeant, one of them, to be able to move those rounds around, he said, because there's no real way to grip them on the bottom. They're very slick, very, very, very smooth. So what he would do, he would take me to the gym and he goes, okay, so really it was about building my upper body and my core strength, and then making sure that my hip flexors were really strong, because you can utilize your leg to kick the round up into your hand and then use your legs as much as possible rather than just muscle your way through it. So there was a lot of technique involved. So he would take me to the gym. He'd put one chair 100 meters away, and another chair 100 meters away, about the same height of what the loading area for the gun is. And I would pick up a 100-pound dumbbell the same way I would pick up a round, and then I would
Mm.
carry it the same way I'd carry around, and then I'd throw it onto the chair, and I'd pick it up again, and I'd walk the other way, and I'd throw it onto the chair, and just keep picking up the same weight in the same technique to build those muscles, and then just do that, and did that on repeat. A lot of arm stuff, really making sure that my arms had the strength to actually pick these things up. Working on my grip strength a lot was important, and really just being able to move them if they needed to be moved. And that was one of the best things, was just literally carrying weight from to the same height it needed to be able to load on the gun, and then just pick it up
Yeah.
and do it again. Pick it up and do it again.
Yeah, I'm just so curious because so much of throwing a baseball has to do with grip strength and hitting too, but especially for pitching, like being able to control the spin and things like that. How were you holding the round? Was it like a cradle position and you would pick the 100-pound
Yeah.
dumbbell up?
Yeah, so I'd like for the round, you'd pick up towards the fuse at the top. You would wrap your hand around that, and then underneath you would kind of roll the round onto the bottom half onto your hand, and you would kind of, I'd kick it up with my right leg to get it up high enough, and then I'd cradle it over, and then you kind of toss it on and kind of use my leg to all my body weight into it to make sure it made it on. Even if you could just get the first half onto it, you could take the back of your hand and then push up. So you could get it on. It just was strategic in how that you had to do it.
And was that close to 100% of your body weight? Like, I'm guessing 5 feet tall.
At the time, I was 103 pounds.
Wow. That is fucking savage.
Well, the thing is, it's not about it being, it's not complicated. It's about technique. Anybody can do it. It's just about being taught a technique that can work, and then you build on that technique. Just like any other sport. It's like, just like in Taekwondo. If I'm going to do a roundhouse, well, my coach is going to make me stand there and do 500 fucking roundhouses in a row, because it's about muscle memory and technique. It's never about how hard you can do it, how fast you can throw it. It's about technique. Technique is everything. And muscle memory, like is everything in sport. It's one of the biggest, most important parts. When your body fails and your brain is tired and stressed, your muscle memory is going to be the thing that saves you.
Yeah, we would do a ton of kettlebell squats, but with dumbbells in the weight room for baseball. And, when you get past 100 pounds, you have to do like that leg kick thing if you want to move up in weight. So I'm just thinking about like the first time I realized that if I wanted to go past 100, 120, and because my legs could handle it, but my arms couldn't like physically curl it up, then I had to learn this kick maneuver where I'm like feeding it to myself and like staying inside the pocket, keeping my elbows tight, and like basically like funneling it up so I could do these squats. So yeah.
I have a video I posted on my Instagram. It's us shooting in Texas before we deployed, and you can see when I was loading the charge bags and opening and closing the breech and arming the 777 at the time. But you can see because I was so short, I had to stand on top of a part of the gun, and when I put the charge bags in, my body kicks forward and I kick my back leg out to give myself that hop up. And so I do it a little more unconventionally, but I did it in a way that worked for me. A lot of those guys just reach down with their right arm and load it in and can push it up. But because of my height difference, I literally had to kind of jump and kick into the air to make sure that it made it up the barrel far enough.
Yeah. And I'm sure the knowledge of Taekwondo and learning how to leverage kicks and twist your body and stay balanced, that all fed into being able to lift heavy objects with technique rather than just trying to rely on pure strength.
Well, like I said, being an athlete, like knowing your body, knowing it from a pretty young age, knowing what it can handle, what it's capable of, but then also understanding how to utilize the push and pull of it is really important. And I went into the Army in really good shape. So I was really fortunate. I had some people in our group who went in overweight and ended up having to leave because they couldn't run up and down the 9 flights of stairs. And it's not bashing them. They just weren't ready for this. And it took them time, and some came back, and some go up to, I think it's like the 13th floor, which is basically if you can't meet the physical qualifications, you go up there and they work you out all day, every day, so that you can go back down to a unit and can meet the physical qualifications.
So it's like a physical purgatory. If you can't meet the requirements, you get a little space to train, and then if you can't do that, then you're gone.
People would call it fat camp.
Fat camp. That's
I did not
more
call it
economical. More economical. Fat camp. Physical purgatory just doesn't have the same ring to it.
Yeah, but people are going to hate me for saying that. But guess what? That's what people called it at the time. You know, I was in a different time. The military has changed a lot since I've been out. And I learned that last week when I went, 2 weeks ago, when I went out to see them for the first time in 13 years. So it did change a lot, and I've learned a lot about it. I arguably think it's gotten softer, but that's because we're not being utilized the same way that we were during Afghanistan.
What about those changes that you saw made you feel like it was getting softer?
Oh, they took I think they took one of the weeks out of basic training, one of the field weeks. You no longer have to do a fireman carry. You no longer have to do a trench dig. You don't have to do push-ups anymore. It's gotten softer. In the Canadian Army now, you're allowed to have your hair any color way you want. You can have nail polish. You can have piercings. You can wear your hair down. You don't have to blouse your boots. Things are different. Things are very different than when I was in.
So how did they, if they took those physical requirements away, how did they properly vet people to be able to tell if they're going to hold it?
The Canadian military states they're no longer a fighting force, right? So Afghanistan ended. Canada was out of that a lot earlier than America. And so we're no longer a fighting force. You don't need to train people the same way, which in my opinion is wrong. And I said that to a bunch of the colonels. I said, I think it's wrong. I think that we should be training hard all the time. And they said they're training hard, but they're not training the same. They're not fighting in an active war. I said, not yet. We're, the reality is if you stay ready, you don't have to get ready. And that's not a cliche term. That's a reality. If you let people slack off and then all of a sudden you need all of them to be strong fighters, well, how do you expect that to happen if for the past 5-10 years, you've told them they don't have to be? It's no different than police force when they gain weight and then you show up in the cops 200 pounds. You go, Who are you chasing?
Yeah, no, it seems like it would be best to be in fighting shape even in the dormant times of the military. I mean, you see this with UFC fighters a lot. Like the guys who tend to excel and can take a fight at any time are the guys that stay within striking distance of their weight / fighting shape. Like they're not in a camp all year round, but they could be there really soon, and Dana White can call them, and 3 weeks later they'll be in the ring. And those guys do really fucking well.
And I think it's really important too, if you're an athlete or whatever it is, if you're a cop, you're a firefighter, you're a paramedic, you're a military member, you're border security, I believe, and people can say whatever they want to this, I believe if you're the front line of defense for whatever position and job that you choose to do, you need to also look after yourself. I also take major issue when doctors are overweight. I also take major issues when a 300-pound doctor walks in the room and has the nerve to tell me what to do with my health. No chance, man. I'm not listening to a word that comes out of your mouth. I'm not. And that may be me being harsh on individuals and from a judgment standpoint, but I'm not judging them because they are that. I'm just saying I'm not going to take advice and take you seriously if you're talking about my health when you look like that. Because it's clear you don't care enough to look after yourself. So why do you care enough to tell me how to look after myself?
Yeah, I had an incident, or not me, but there was an incident when I was on the subway yesterday coming back from the gym, and this guy who was clearly something wrong with him mentally ill, was just yelling in people's faces, like going down the subway, which happens. But
I don't tolerate that well.
Yeah. you learn very quickly to put headphones in even when you're not listening to anything and just ignore the shit out of people, which is probably not good for
Isn't that sad?
Human nature. It is. And it's a sad reality of part of the person I've become living in New York is that I've gotten really good at ignoring people to
It's time for you to move away from New York.
I have had those thoughts a lot. And I am getting closer to that. I've lived around New York my whole life. My family is in Long Island, which is about 45 minutes away from me. So there are benefits to being able to, you know, go out of the city or go up to snowboard in Vermont, things like that. But there are other places that also have those benefits. And I can convince, you know, my parents are pretty close to retiring, you know, just get out of Long Island and come somewhere else, you know, go across the country or whatever. But yeah, I was on the subway yesterday. This dude's just going up and down in a circle, just yelling in people's faces. And he went past me. I'm just like, whatever, fucking, he's just walking. I made sure there's a good amount of space between me and him. And then he continued, and then he went to the middle of the car. And then this guy told him to stop, and then he pushed the mentally ill guy pushed this guy in a suit. The guy in the suit pushed him back. The mentally ill guy tripped, fell, and then got back up looking like he was gonna, you know, cause a problem. At that point, the train happened to be pulling into a station. It stopped there for 5-7 minutes. And the cops were called. I was a half a mile away from my apartment, so my plan was to just walk out anyway. But as I was walking out, this really fat cop walked in to go handle the subway car. And in my mind, I was
handling anybody.
And in my mind, I was like, listen, I've done martial arts for a few years now. Like, I've had my ass kicked by overweight people. Like, I know that is a possibility that someone could be very technically good and also have a few extra pounds on them. But this guy was like offensively fat for a cop, like to the point where I couldn't imagine him being able to do his job if he had to run someone down, be able to subdue someone.
Own safety.
Yeah, for his own safety.
For his own safety.
Yeah, exactly. So in my mind, I was thinking, you know, if this altercation was worse, if someone had a weapon, someone had a knife or a gun, or someone was continuing to try to beat the shit out of someone, this guy's not going to do shit. Like, he has a gun, but it would help you enormously to also be in shape and be able to protect yourself. And I just, like, I know I can't get a full grasp of someone's physical capabilities just by looking at them. There's more to the story, but I just can't, like, in my mind, I walked past him and I was like, what the fuck? Like, how is this guy going to do shit?
It's only frustrating. Like, look, I just think our society and culture has, because of people like Lizzo who act like they're healthy and say that they're healthy. Well, you can be fat and healthy. You can't. That's not, I'm sorry. This isn't to bash overweight people. This is a care more about yourself. Here's the thing. People don't get like that for no reason. Very often there's a trauma involved there, and I'm empathetic towards that. But here's where I get upset, is when you have these actors and actresses who are morbidly obese on the cover of things like Cosmo and Fitness World saying overweight and healthy. That's not, like, that's an oxymoron. It's unacceptable to say that, because then you're telling the next generation, the very young, impressionable generation, that it's okay to be like that and that it's healthy when it's not. It causes massive issues, including, and not limited to, look at the way COVID went for people with comorbidities of overweight. If you're a cop, you owe it to yourself for your safety. Not forget anybody else. Forget what anyone else thinks or cares. For yourself, if somebody grabbed a hold of you or you're chasing down a suspect, it's not going to happen. You're right. There might be people who are very, very, very proficient in grappling and jiu-jitsu and things like that. But tell me how many of those, few and far between. I just think you owe it to yourself and the service and those that you're serving alongside to do your best in all things that you can. That could potentially be the reason you're alive or dead at the end of a shift.
Yeah, I always think when I hear people saying, like, obese can be healthy, you don't see a lot of obese influencers in their 50s and 60s. There are a ton of fit men and women that you see on magazine covers that have gray hair, you know, like the silver foxes, they're fit. The women that are fit at that age, the options really drop off after the 20s and 30s for the people who are obese and on magazine covers. Like, it's not a sustainable thing to,
well, think about what you're doing to your inside. No, think about what you're doing to your inside. Think about what you're doing to your joints. Think about what you're doing to your spine. I mean, there's no issue with, listen, a lot of us gain weight, we fluctuate, we do whatever. Life happens, trauma happens. Food is America, and half the time I don't blame the people for being overweight either. I blame these conglomerates and organizations who were paid off to say that sugar was okay and that fats were bad and that we should be looking at food differently in our food pyramid. So I don't blame these people. It sucks because a lot of these generations before us were set up to fail because of diet and because of health and because of trauma. They were never taught it's okay to talk about things. So they ate themselves into these issues. And then you develop diabetes and so on and so forth. And it's not healthy. And I'm really, quite frankly, tired of individuals telling me that, for their body size, they should be, maybe 135. And you know what? Maybe they're sitting at 235 or 250. It's like, I'm sorry, no. You have to have some self-accountability. And like I said, if it's trauma related, like, give us a call. We'll get you some trauma support. We'll get you some help. But you should want for yourself and for those around you, especially if you have children, you should want to care. You should want to stick around. But the chances of you sticking around as long as somebody who's the same person, but 100 pounds less, like my buddy, Ryan Culberson, he's a Marine, really awesome guy. He gained a bunch of weight. Like after a bunch of stuff happened to him, he walked off 100 pounds in 1 year just by walking. That's
Really?
it. Changed his diet and walking.
Do you know how much he was walking per day?
Yeah, he was roughly, I think he was between like up to 12 miles a day, 12 or plus. But that's all he did. He didn't do weights. He cut out bullshit. He started eating predominantly. Well, now he thinks that vegetables are the devil. So sorry, Ryan. But he thinks, he's a carnivore guy, right? So, he eats the cleanest I've ever seen for most people. He's got the most energy and he walked it off. And what he would do is he would literally put his son on his back and walk. And that's it. It doesn't like people think that to be well and to be healthy, you have to be these huge CrossFit athletes or these runners or these whatever. You don't, man. You just got to move your body. But most people think moving the body is if I'm not running or I'm not doing this, I'm not going to lose weight. It's like, well, over half of it, majority of it is what you put in your mouth.
Yeah. This guy would like half of my freezer because it's full of meat and cream spinach. So he'd be like,
he hates spinach.
He like
hates it.
Yeah, it's I mean, even just walking is better than nothing. And I mean, walking 12 miles a day is nowhere close to nothing. Like that's a shit ton of walking. But
if you just walk, like for people who are completely like sanitary, if you're just sitting and you don't walk at all, so do yourself a favor. Instead of walking to the bathroom once a day, walk to the bathroom 3 times a day. If it's, I don't like to walk down the street to the stop sign. Okay, walk down to the street to the stop sign once a day. And then the next week, do 2 times a day. And then the next week, do 3 times a day. You just got to start. And that's the biggest thing, is just starting. And that's what we preach in our Mental Health Monday. That's what we talk about in our Signal group with our BNU Army. It's walk, just start, do anything. I don't even give a shit. I don't care. Take a can of something and just do bicep curls with it. You're doing more than you were doing sitting still. It doesn't have to be these huge workouts where you're beasting yourself, but any effort is better than no effort.
Oh yeah, I've done 1,000 calf raises on this seat since we started recording this podcast.
Exactly. Perfect.
You can do it from wherever.
Exactly.
So are you ready for the smoothest transition of all time?
Kind of now.
So you probably did a lot of walking when you first arrived in Afghanistan.
That was good, man.
Does that make it smoother to point out that I'm going to do it? It's like trying to pick up a girl at a bar and be like, okay,
I do it all the time.
I'm going to give you my pickup line in about 30 seconds. Mentally prepare yourself. I'm going to come back in 30 seconds and then we're going to go from there. All right. Break.
I do it all the time. You're good. You're solid. I liked it.
Yeah. So what year did you arrive in Afghanistan, and after how much training was it? I think you said September to April was the training. 8 months?
Well, I did January to April of training. So basic
Okay.
training, SQ, DP1. Then I was posted to regiment. And we did workup training, meaning we went somewhere else and played war games to get ready. And then I deployed in April of 2009.
Where were the war games at before Afghanistan?
Wainwright, Alberta.
So that's, what is that, like tundra? What I don't know what
It's
Alberta's
okay.
like.
So you are right below Toronto. So you're middle of
Mhm.
Canada kind of deal there. So go far west. So we're only Alberta's only one province over from being on the edge. So
Mhm.
where I live in British Columbia, I'm right on the ocean. And then it goes Alberta. So you've got mountains there. You've got like Rockies, kind of. You've got the Coquihalla, which is the big freeway
Mm.
that goes, and it's cold. It gets really cold. It can, minus 40 degrees. I don't know what you guys call that in America. You guys just need to get with our
It's
system,
fucking
man.
cold.
It's fucking cold.
No, look,
Um,
we love our inches and miles.
I know all about it.
Yeah, we love
I
our
know.
miles.
So it gets about it can get down to minus 40. It can get really vicious. And we had this thing called Operation Maple Leaf, which is where we had other soldiers from other parts of Canada come and play the Taliban. And we would have this field decks where we had these systems on us that were like laser systems, basically like a large game of laser tag. And they would attack you and your unit and things like that. And you would learn how to subdue or move around them and maneuver. You basically learned how to manage what would be war to the best of your ability. Although you're going to the middle of the Middle East, it didn't quite feel like the right way to train, but I'm not the colonel. So
Mm.
Alberta was where we did workup training, where everyone in Canada goes to do workup training. And then we also went down to Texas, which looked a little more similar heat-wise and location-wise to Afghanistan. We went down there for about a week. And we did live fire exercises with the 777s. And then we came back from that. And then we took time off. Christmas happened. No, we took time off. That was after Christmas. And then time off. And then we came back to the regiment, pack all your stuff, send it over early. And you just kind of wait around. You work out every day.
Mm.
And because you're combat arms, there's, when you're getting ready to deploy, all the guns are gone. You're just working out and hanging out with your people and making sure everyone's ready to go.
So you go from the war games in Alberta, which is basically like the fight camp for battle. Like you have someone mimicking the Taliban essentially.
Mm-hmm.
You go to Afghanistan at a first base somewhere, or you go overseas to a first base and then you deploy?
Yeah. So for us,
there,
there's
okay.
a stopover point in before you go to Afghanistan. You don't fly directly from Canada because you take a commercial flight that it's a big plane, but there's no civilians on it except for the like the crew. And they fly you to one location. You stay in that location for a couple of days, and that's where you get your bulletproof plates, your rifle, your live rounds, your excuse me, your helmet, and everything that you need. Then you go from that stop point and you fly into Kandahar, into CAF there.
Okay. So you stock up, you fly into Kandahar. When you land at the base, what does it look like? What are you seeing? What are you hearing? Like, what is Kandahar?
It's hot as fuck.
How hot?
It's hot. It's like it can get up to 55 degrees. So I don't know what that is. It just feels like you're in an oven.
Probably like 100 something. Yeah.
Oh yeah, more than that.
At least,
and it's dry. Yeah. It's dry. So it's like just hot. Flew in there, got to CAF. CAF is really, 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 really big. I don't know the full diameter. You probably give it a Google. If you Google CAF in Afghanistan, it's massive. It's basically the safe zone where everyone flies in and out of. Officers are run there. There's a Tim Hortons there, a Subway there, a boardwalk there, ball hockey there. That's where anybody who's a musician, most of the time they come there, they play there. Like it's a fairly safe area for the most part. And so you fly in there. And then for us, we did kind of got all of our kit. And then we did a briefing as to, what's going on in the country, what's the situational awareness like. And then my unit, my gun troop got onto a Chinook and then went out to a FOB.
And the FOB is a war zone, like live fire?
No, yeah. So everything's live fire once you're in the country. But
Okay.
a FOB is called a forward observation base. They are small bases all over Afghanistan where a small amount of soldiers are to kind of either hold ground, provide cover fire, or to have soldiers going in and out of as another location, strategic location.
Okay, so that is like the fob is considered inside the wire, and then when you go outside the wire, you're going, and then you come back to the fob.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. Yeah, I'm just trying to get a picture of like
It's okay.
the logistics of traveling and shit.
So for
There's a
me,
lot.
yeah, it depends. Like for us in particular, like people sometimes drive by road. We flew in a Chinook, which is those longer rectangular. They have small windows all along the sides of it, and they have two. I think they have two blades going at the top, and they kind of move fairly slow, and they lift up like a helicopter, and they kind of go forward.
Mhm.
The back door is always down. Someone's always hanging off the back with a machine gun, and you fly fairly low, and you're flying over all of these different villages and places to get out to this fob. And then for us, we got dropped off at the fob, and the fob was not very big. It was maybe a couple kilometers around completely. It was not big at all. It was in the middle of nowhere. And we have this material. I don't know what the Americans made this fob. So this was an American fob. It's called Fob Ramrod. They were using Canadian guns, but it was run by Americans. So we were the only Canadians there. And they use this like wire mesh material and then this like sandbag material to make these walls out of.
Mhm.
And then you have OP towers kind of all along it. So everyone's watching all angles of the fob. And then there's a small gate there to come in and out. And that's where I spent my deployment in terms of when I was on the 777s.
Mhm. What was it like the first time that you went outside the wire?
I only went outside the wire on the operation. I went with the British, and I only went one time, and I was gone for a week. I flew in at night, and we were on an op that I didn't know a whole lot about. I had very limited information given to me, but I was with the British. We flew on an op, and it was pitch black. We flew in the middle of the night. So we landed, I think we left at like 1 a.m., and we were where we were going to be hours before morning prayer, which is roughly around like I think like 4-ish in the morning. And so it's pitch black, and it's a hard, solid ground. It's weird because when you walk outside the wire, when you're on the ground, you don't really know what's under it. And that's the thing, is like one of the biggest, most used tools that it felt like was utilized was the IEDs, and sort of any sort of improvised explosive device. They were very strategic in where they placed, and they were very effective in taking out soldiers. So when you get there, you don't really realize that things could be under your feet. You just kind of move and you go, and you're aware of it, but subconsciously you have to move and do your job. So it was the middle of the night when I got there. But it wasn't a great week. So being outside the wire is not. I mean, everyone, when they're bored, then they're inside the fobs or the CAF. Like, I want to go do something. It's like, well, you don't actually. You just think you do.
So IED, improvised explosive
Device.
So that could literally be anything once you're outside the wire. Is there a most common type of device you would see, or it's literally just like whatever someone has, they'll make a bomb out of it?
I wish I had more knowledge for you. Like I said, if you were talking to somebody who was maybe a 15, 17, 10-year multiple deployments person, they'd have more clear, concise answers for you. But basically what I could see and what I was seeing when we were there was anything was being utilized. We weren't allowed to throw out batteries or anything like that, because what they would do is they would string a whole bunch of dead batteries together, just enough to get a spark, and use pressure plates. So some of the things we'd be finding outside the wire would be old saws. They would take old saws and they'd put them together, one on top of the other. And then when somebody would step on it, it would act as the pressure plate device to set it off. And so they would use a lot of garbage, our old garbage, against us, and they would plant them in the ground where you wouldn't know they were there. You'd trip over a wire, it could go off. They use a ton of different ways. If anything, they were incredibly good at utilizing really unconventional tools to make effective bombs. Like, they really did a great job. they use these things called daisy chain IEDs, which they can put in the walls, and it's just basically one explosion turns on another explosion, turns on another, and it's all the way through. And so IEDs were everywhere, anywhere and everywhere, anywhere and everywhere. That's why if you talk to an Afghan or Iraq vet, it's like you're not going to ever see them kick a piece of garbage over, like ever. It's not going to happen.
Yeah. So yeah, anything on the ground could be something that could just take your life instantly.
Not even just on the ground. It could be in the walls. It could be
walls.
It could be anything. It didn't really matter. They would put them. They put them on the road. They put them under the cauldrons, under the bridges. Like they put them anywhere and everywhere. And like the big ones they would put on the roads, the ones that would take out tanks and Humvees and stuff like that. I mean, they would attach massive amounts of gasoline tanks to these. Like they'd fill up big blue drums, put them in the ground, attach multiples to them. So when they blew, it was a huge explosion.
Mm. So are you able to walk me through that week outside the wire, like when you were with the British?
I'll give you a little bit. I try to stay away from it. I've spoken about it pretty publicly multiple times. And it's always come back to be a very interesting response. Although I do have a book coming out in July where I illustrate and go through it in a various depths. But yeah, we were with the Brits. I really didn't get any situational awareness. I had no idea what we were really meant to do. My whole job was to look after the women and children, meaning I was the CST. I was a cultural support team. And in Afghanistan, men can't touch the women, can't take the burqas off. Obviously, due to religion, they can't touch the children either. So from like a certain age and under. So often when we would go into these compounds and these things, what they were seeing is women and children would normally flee. But it finally got to a point where they weren't fleeing anymore. And soldiers would kick open the door and there'd be a bunch of women and kids. But the Taliban got smart and wise to that and realized that a lot of Americans and people weren't bringing women with them, which means they could hide, whether it be radios or money or ICOM radios, anything that they didn't want the Americans or people or the British or whomever to find, they would hide them within the women's burqas or their hair or things like that, because they didn't ever have anybody to touch the women. So I was with the Brits. I was their CST, and my job was, when we kick a door in, would be able to take all of the women and kids and put them in a separate room. And then I would be in there by myself, searching every single one of them head to toe, methodically, individually, and looking for weapons, looking for radios, looking for money. They like stacks and stacks of money. Meant, okay, where did you get that from and why do you have it? All the way down to drugs, pretty much anything that they looks like could be some type of contraband was my job was to find. And it was always a shock because I looked like a small male soldier, just because my hair's tucked in, I'm wearing the same gear, doing the same things. And so we, I think it was on day 2, we lost a soldier. We were going from compound to compound, and we were in firefights quite frequently. And we finally got to a point one day when we were clearing out an area and we were waiting for the okay clear to kind of move forward. And that's when one of our soldiers hit an IED, an improvised explosive device. He hit it, I think it was either with his foot or with some of the British, they use these, I don't know what they call them, but basically it looks like a metal detector. So he either hit it with his foot or that, I'm not exactly sure, but he set off a big IED that was inside of a grape hut. And that killed him instantly, which was quite tragic to witness. And the individual that was standing was down on one knee doing cover fire. He also took a big part of the blast and had his left side quite damaged. And so that one was quite a tragic event, and it was very difficult to witness. After that, often the Taliban and Al-Qaeda like to use those moments and film them. They're always watching. If something like that goes off, they're watching. They like to film it. They like to utilize it as propaganda videos. And so also it sets like a secondary device or a trigger. So once that goes off, people rush in to get help and then they attack them. So that's what happened to us. We all rushed forward, and then they started shooting mortars downrange at us and then started shooting live fire at us. And then while we were waiting for the Pedro helicopters, which are the Blackhawks, to come pick up what was left of the soldier and the other individual that was hurt, while one comes in, these guys are the most experienced, brave. I'm still yet to have a Pedro on my show, but I am looking to speak with someone who did fly a Blackhawk for those, because they will come in when others won't. And they would come in and pick up the casualties, and they would do everything they can to keep them alive. And then while that's happening, another one would take off and lay down living hell on anybody they saw on the ground that caused what just happened. And so I owe the firing and one of our soldiers who did survive, who ultimately passed away later on. We do owe a lot to those people. So after that incident, we spent the rest of the week just in and out of firefights, left, right, and center. We didn't sustain, my unit when I was with them didn't sustain another. I heard over the radio there was another, I think it was, because I was with a platoon of people and I got moved around. So I didn't stay with one group of people. I would get shuffled from point A to point B to point C, depending on who needed a female operator. There was another Canadian that was also with us, but I never saw her. She got shuffled in between as well, but I am aware that she did experience a similar situation where an ANA went inside a building and an IED went off, and we lost some more soldiers that way, and she was right behind it. So there was a lot of loss sustained by the British in the summer of 2009, as well as the Americans. I know the British took one of the biggest hits of all of the war, if I'm not mistaken, in the Helmand province, Pandra district and whatnot. But the Brits that I knew took serious hits the week I was with them, as well as subsequently the couple weeks after I wasn't with them. The people that I was just with, we did lose a handful of those guys as well.
So the Taliban, you mentioned they'll film this stuff that goes on when an IED blast goes off. Are they they're looking for a response from you, and then in the film, will they cut out the initial blast so it just looks like soldiers are shooting at the Taliban, or
no, they want to see the soldier die.
Okay, so they're using it as internal propaganda to
and external.
Kind of like
they put it on Twitter, like the Taliban has Twitter.
Yeah. No, I mean, I've seen some horrific videos, and just hearing about a particular incident where that comes from, and like the thinking behind, the thinking behind a group of people from which I've never encountered a person from, or knowingly encountered a person from. It's difficult to wrap my head around someone who would do that.
Oh, but it wasn't just someone. There's a lot of people.
A lot of people.
And they praise it when it happens. You can hear them on the ICOM radio praising God, being happy, celebrating. Like it's a really difficult thing. I wish you could speak to somebody who has experienced a lot more than I have, because I'm just one person who was injured in one operation. I know guys who have done 8, 9, 10, 15 tours of this, throughout their life, where they're taking down bad guys like it's going out of style, like they're flies. And these guys have witnessed some of the most horrific things known to man. But we all have our burden to bear, our story to tell. But my situation just happened to be what it was, and I was just in a shitty place at a shitty time, and it's difficult to witness. It's difficult to witness that happen, and it's difficult to witness evil in that way. And that's the one thing I learned over there was, how are you supposed to win a war when the enemy is not playing by the same rules? When you indiscriminately bomb anybody, like the same people that would try to kill our soldiers are fucking killing, Afghan schoolgirls. Like they're extremism applies in any sort of religion and culture. There is an extreme version of everything. And so I happen to just be fighting an extreme version of there, but the people from that country, they're not all like that. They don't all feel that way. They don't all think that way. I just happen to be fighting a in particular, very evil subset of brainwashed individuals who believe that killing innocents is the way to God and 72 virgins. Like, it's not, people will do anything when you brainwash them to that point. And what's really tragic is they used to use women and kids. They'd strap IED vests to kids. They'd put a backpack full of explosives with toys around it and then blow the fucking thing up. Like, there was no remorse. There was no care for human life. They didn't give a shit. And they showed that, and they showed that in a real cruel way. And then you're going to get listeners who are going to go, well, that's really unfair of her to, judge a whole culture that way. And I'm not. I'm judging the extremist version that I fought against. And then there's also going to be the people that are going to say, well, you went to war. How would you feel if somebody kicked your door open in the middle of the night? I'm like, you're right. I'd blast a motherfucker with a shotgun. You're right. I don't want anyone kicking my door in. But when I went for a mission, and I was going to complete that mission, and I knew what I was going to do. And what I was told is that I was going to help women and kids. Now, the reality, 20 years later, we know that wasn't the whole goal. We understand politics, we understand money, and we understand how things work. But at the time, what I was told, what I believed in, was what I was doing was right.
Yeah. So when a blast goes off like that from an IED, what is the protocol? Like, because is that just that's just the beginning of the fight? That's like the kickoff. What's the protocol, and what does that do to your senses of your body and mind trying to react in that moment and knowing that there's something you should be doing versus like what you're actually experiencing?
Well, that's when the muscle memory comes into play, right? You learn, you train how you think you're supposed to fight. You train to fight. You don't train to be docile. So when the IED blast went off, the comms went crazy, and the interpreters were sitting beside the ICOM, and you could listen and you could hear them, the Taliban, praising God over it and being grateful. And then it set all hell loose, Like I said, they started shooting mortars at us, and those are fucking indiscriminate and inaccurate. So you never know where those are going to land. And they can be accurate, but I mean, the way the Taliban shoot things, most of the time they're not accurate at all. That's why IEDs were so proficient and did such damage over such a long period of time and took so many lives, because you just got to step on it. You just got to be near it. You don't have to shoot and aim. You just blow it up. The damage is so drastic. So for me, when it happened, comms went off, and we were waiting to go, and we were ready to move. It took me a long time to wrap my head around what I just saw. But once we got the all clear, it must have been no more than a couple minutes after the blast went off, a bunch of us just took off running towards it.
Is it just like a flash of light, or do you see things flying up in the air? Like, what did it actually look like?
No, it's different in every situation, right? It's in my situation personally, I watched somebody be blown into pieces and what was left to fly through the air. So he was in a building that the blast obviously went upwards and outwards. So when you watch something like that happen, it's like something out of a movie. You can't wrap your brain around what you just witnessed because it seems so damn foreign, because where else would you ever have seen something like that? So for me, it took a minute to realize what I just witnessed. And once I did, and everything, the ground shook and everyone, the comms panicked. Once we got the okay to go, that's when we ran. And that's when we ran towards it. And I went over to the medic and helped him with something, and then ran over towards the grape hut with a couple other guys, and we were ready to fight. We take the fight to the fucking enemy. We're not going to sit there and let them come to us. So we move forward, we move up, and what we ended up doing was body collection and what was left. And so while the fighting was going on, we were collecting as much as we could, because any soldier ever gets left behind. And we were collecting everything we could. We put everything we could on a stretcher. And then we ran through fucking open fire as fast as we could with what we had left to those Blackhawks, and to get him on the plane.
Does time feel different in that moment?
Yeah, it moves slow. It's like like I said, I've talked about that before. It's like it's like slows down. It's like that slow motion where it's like no matter how fast you move, your body isn't going. It's that like in a movie where you're just tunnel vision, everything goes black and it's hyper tunnel vision and your adrenaline kicks up to like a 12 and you're trying to run and you're running and you're moving fast, but you feel like you're moving like that and you can't get going fast enough. No matter what you do, it just felt like you couldn't go fast enough. That was my experience because I had never, like I said, the day before that, we were in firefights all day. We were getting hit all night long, but I didn't, that it just wasn't the same. When you watch what we watched happen, your body just it shuts
Mhm.
down in a way. Part of it just shuts off and the other part kicks on and you just go.
So it's like your time is slowing down. You it's you're running, doing things in slow motion. In your like that's the physicality of it. In your mind, is it also slow? Like do you
Mm-hmm.
feel like does your actual perception change of the passing of time, or is it purely from a physical standpoint, like you're in a dream and you're trying to run faster?
Well, I don't know because I mean it's been so long
Hmm.
for me, but from what I can gather, what I could remember, it was very much I could hear my heartbeat. I could hear my heartbeat pounding in my ears very clearly. I couldn't move fast enough. My breathing was fast paced. Everything, the adrenaline, I've never felt adrenaline like that in my life. And even now, when I think about those times, it's my body somewhat disassociates from the real feelings of that because it causes such a cortisol spike and it causes such a reaction to my body that I just start shaking. And it's something that left a massive scar on me for a very, very long time. And it's something that, I experienced with a handful of people. And then trying to articulate that to those people who were not a part of that is very difficult because it's not something anybody should have to experience. But I did choose to go. I did choose to go to do my job. I was proud of my job. I was proud of my service. And I was proud to get the opportunity to go with the Black Watch. I
Hmm.
was very proud of what I did with them. And I showed up. And like I said, that comes down to what I said before. You just got to show the fuck up. Even if it's difficult, you just got to show up. And I was
Hmm.
fortunate that I didn't freeze. Because you don't, you practice all your drills, you do all of these things so that if it does get confronted with it, you don't freeze. And some people I know still do freeze. I was lucky in that moment for whatever reason, whether it was because of the support of the guys I had around me, which I think 99% of it was. I wanted to show up for them. I wanted to make sure that that group of people was supported.
Hmm. Yeah, like the support plus the muscle memory training, I guess, kicks in even in a situation as horrific as that. Like I can't even
Mhm.
begin to imagine how my own body and mind would react in a situation like that. But I just like the complete physical mental shock of seeing someone and something blown to pieces right in front of you, and then instantaneously having to complete a task that it it seems like something has to, like, you just have to basically turn off to continue doing your job. Like I don't know exactly what that is, but if you take in everything that you're feeling, you I don't know how you would be able to perform in that moment. Like it seems like there's needs to be some sort of switch that flips to just be like
It
keep
does. The
going.
switch does flip. It does. I felt it physically happen. I talk about it often because it's a weird thing to describe, but I just call it my light switch. It just turns off. It just turns off. You could feel part of your brain just go, nope, not doing that. And, again, like this, it's hard. I've seen what happens when I tell this story. I've seen the backlash that comes from it. Um,
What is the backlash, like, from people just not wanting to hear it, or because I understand
no,
people being uncomfortable, but I don't
no, there's
understand
always
negativity.
backlash. Oh, man. There's always
I
negativity that
understand
comes from
negativity, but
someone.
not from a story like that. I don't see how
Yeah,
someone can be
there's a
negative.
lot of people become negative when they say that someone's never been involved in it. Yeah, right. So, like, when bad things happen like this, and people get opportunities to talk on podcasts about it, and they get opportunities to, do things because of tragic things that happened, others struggle with that. It irritates others' egos, right? So they lash out in whatever way they can. And I saw that happen last year after I did some big appearances. I saw it happen online. I saw it happen, and it's the most tragic thing. But what I took from it was, people are going to always have something to say about every part of your life.
Mm,
The thing that I learned is that, and I've always known, is that I'm no one special. I have friends on that phone I could pull up that were involved in Mogadishu, which was the Black Hawk Down. I have people who have done incredible, gnarly, out of this world operations, and I don't hold a fucking candle to them. You know what I mean?
yeah.
Because they are warriors in a way that, you know, I'm grateful every day I never had to witness half of what they had to witness or do half of what they had to do.
Yeah.
And so it depends, man. The world is a interesting place, and you learn really quickly when
It's
you're vulnerable what that can look like.
it's an interesting place, and what you're describing is also, a very dark part of the human ego, and something that I'm susceptible to as well, is that when you see someone else getting an opportunity and they're speaking about something, you just automatically, I don't know what it is, if it's jealousy or you want the spotlight and you say, I want that opportunity, I want to talk about that, not her, that you don't take a second and think about the experiences that are presenting that opportunity. Like, do you really want that opportunity? Because you can't just take the spotlight. You have to take the experiences that went to the spotlight. And I suspect that people that are giving you backlash would not even dare to walk near that.
Some people were with me.
Really? Okay.
Yeah, that's what I'm saying. It's a very tricky thing, trauma, right? Just goes back to the conversation
Yeah.
before about people who eat their way into unhealthy positions, or trauma is a fickle bitch, man.
Mhm.
Trauma affects everyone differently, and it can
Mhm.
affect how they think and feel. It can affect the way that they see things. It can affect a lot of things.
Mhm.
And I think the difference here in my situation is I happen to be a woman in that place where a lot of people don't believe I had a right to be. And I didn't fucking choose to be there. I just
Mhm.
was put there. You just take your whatever you get, and you do the
Mhm.
best with it that you can. And so that's why I don't often talk about what happened to me in Afghanistan and what happened to my friends and what happened to those around me, because frankly, I don't need to give anybody else any ammunition to just try to discredit or destroy or tarnish those who are lost. I refuse to do it any longer. I think the takeaways from the experiences I've had are that life is precious and it's fleeting and it can be gone in the blink of an eye.
Mhm.
And if we only cared about ourselves and our culture and our society as much as we cared when we were in war, the world would be a better place. Society doesn't, whatever happened these past couple of years, we went from being about we to I. We went from being about the collective to individual. And we stopped caring about how things affect people or make them feel. We just stopped giving a shit about anything besides what was good for I. And I think
Mhm.
it's really sad to witness. Everybody speaks of being together or for the collective, but that's not the reality of, and that, because if that were, people would be acting differently. And so for me, like I said, I'll be speaking more about it next year, obviously, because it's not really a choice. I'm about to put it out on blast for everyone and take whatever comes with that. But at the end of the day, I stand by what I did, who I
Mm.
served with, and my operational capabilities. And I'm proud to have served alongside, you know, Craig Buchanan and Steve Noble and Chris Watson and Danny Ventura and Hoppo and Gus. And I stand by those guys that I worked with.
Mm.
And Craig Hardy, like, fuck, these guys are warriors, man. These guys were with me I was only with them for a brief period, but it was the worst part of my life. And I know that they went back out and did it again, and did it again, and did it again, and did it again. So those are the fucking warriors in life. I got privy to be a part of their life. And I'm grateful for that, regardless how traumatic or painful or horrific it was. I'm fucking stoked to have any time I got with them.
So after the British operation, you're still serving. You go back to No.
We had to do an after action report. When anybody dies or anything happens, you have to go sit with the MPs, the military police, to kind of give a rundown. So we did that. And then they were seeing signs and symptoms in me right away of post-traumatic stress. So they put me on 10 different pharmaceutical drugs, sleep, anxiety, all of this stuff. And then they sent me on my HLTA, which is like your break that you get when you do a deployment. And so I went and did that, and that went horrifically bad. Just drinking and combination of pharmaceutical meds, combination of just a whole bunch of things. And then I went back to Afghanistan to finish out my deployment. And they sent me back out to the FOB. And they did not tell my superiors that I was heavily medicated. So I was running the machine gun and the 777. I don't remember much. So that was fun. And then once they realized the amount of medication I was on and that could be a really dangerous situation, coupled with a situation that happened, they sent me back to CAF. And once I was at CAF, they officially diagnosed me with post-traumatic stress and sent me home and said that I was done. They sent me home to the hospital, and I was to report to my old unit to get my paperwork and then go to outpatient treatment in Ottawa.
So there was no sort of communication between the doctor that prescribed you meds and then your reporting officer, whoever you were
No.
underneath. There's nothing to say, by the way, she's on 10 different medications that may affect some things.
No. And you know what's really interesting? So I was stating that my sergeant at the time, Mark LeBlanc, who's now a captain, like I was with him for first time I saw him since Afghanistan was 2 weeks ago. And the Canadian Army brought me back out to make it right, because the way I was looked after, I'm being sarcastic here, and abandoned by the Canadian military, they knew was wrong, and they wanted to make it right. So they brought me back out to the artillery guns for the last time 2 weeks ago to go shoot what is called a last round. And it's normally only given to somebody who has served 20 years or somebody who has, not my words, the CO's words, were somebody who was given an extraordinary sacrifice. And so they brought me out to do that. And that was the first time I saw my sergeant. Well, I call him Sarge, but my capt. First time I'd seen him since Afghanistan in 2009. And he'll tell you, and he wrote a review in the book, and he talks about it openly, and he's very transparent. He goes, I had no idea. No one told me. I had no goddamn clue until you showed me one day when you pulled out all the pills.
Yeah. So you have this hazy blackout period of your deployment at the end. You get diagnosed with PTSD, and then you go back to Canada. What was the day-to-day like once you were a civilian? Are you considered a civilian at that point?
No, I didn't get medically released from the military till 2011.
2011. Okay. So when you were back in Canada, but before you were medically released, what was that day-to-day like for you, having experienced that IED incident, being medicated, obviously going through enormous amounts of trauma? What were you feeling? What were you seeing, thinking?
From what I can remember, Not a whole lot. It was very, very dark. The military never called for 6 months. No one contacted me. I was kind of going in and out of treatment. I don't remember a lot. I was very drugged up. I was very suicidal. I did attack some people in a Walmart who were of Middle Eastern descent and had a full-blown flashback and had to be removed by my mother.
That was a trigger.
Oh, yeah, say the least. I had a hard time with Middle Eastern men after that.
I can imagine.
Yeah, I'm not a big fan of the way they treat women, so, I get a little cranky. When I see a man I saw him standing in a Walmart. It was a kid was there and his wife, and the mom was wearing like a full burqa. And then like the husband was wearing like t-shirt and jeans, and the kid was like normal, but I just felt like I just saw the oppression, and I just got violently angry very quickly, and I had a full flashback, and then I wasn't there anymore. I started throwing things off of the shelves and like screaming really heinous things, and was fully back there. So it was really bad. Finally, after a while, the military decided to get around to contacting me and said, we're going to try to retrain you. So they sent me back out to Connaught Range in Ottawa, which is one of the largest Commonwealth ranges in the Commonwealth. And civilians can shoot on there as well as military and RCMP. And so they tried to retrain me by having me come in like 2 half days a week and exposing me to gunfire and exposing me to noises and the culture and just getting myself back acclimated. It was going okay. I was not well, and frankly, I didn't hold up my end of the bargain. I didn't stay there. I left. I kept leaving and going outside of the bounds of where I was supposed to be going, but I was not in my right mind, and I still, to this day, agree that I was more comatose and drugged out than I should have been. And so because of that, there was an incident at the range when I went to clear something, and I had a full-blown breakdown again. And they just said, yeah, we don't think this is going to work out. So then they put me through the paperwork process at the JPSU. And then finally, we're like, yeah, we think this is going to be it for you. And we're going to give you a 3B medical release, which means medically retired due to post-traumatic stress due to deployment in Afghanistan. So they released me May 23rd of 2011. And then May 24th, I was on a plane out to British Columbia, I was dating my boyfriend, who is now my husband, and I've been out here ever since.
Is there any sort of proactive PTSD training in the Army, like just to give people the tools to be able to unpack shit when it does happen? Like, not that you can ever eliminate it, but I don't even know what that would entail, whether it's talking, mental exercises, just things to give you tools to be able to process shit down the line. Is there any sort of proactive trauma training, or not really?
Back then, no, it wasn't. We weren't, at least in the group I was in. So I'm not speaking for all soldiers. I'm not speaking for all Canadians. I'm not speaking for all Americans. I'm speaking for my particular lived experience. When I first was in, no, we didn't. No. Not at all. That's why my superiors didn't recognize the signs and symptoms when I got back. So when I got back, my sergeant, Mark, he had served in Bosnia before and in Afghanistan multiple times before that. He was 33 when he was my sergeant. That's the age I am now. So he had this 19-year-old who just went outside the wire to do an operation he did not want me a part of. He was very clear that it's a bad idea for her to go out by herself. She should never have went on her own. He holds true to that today. And when I got back, I went from being loud and talking all the time to complete silence and not eating and having anger outbursts like you would not see. Like, it was,
so
I had always
binge,
been
like complete personality.
Fucking 100%. And so now, obviously now the military is doing a much better job. At least this is what I'm being told. They're working really hard to be better advocates, more aware, more conscious, more on top of mental well-being for their soldiers, if only to have longevity in soldiers. We didn't understand then what we understand now, right? We didn't understand that when you shoot a 777 or any sort of gun, there's a concussive blast that causes traumatic brain injury. You don't have to be near an explosion to get a traumatic brain injury. You don't have to have something hit on your head anymore. We understand things have changed. We're starting to wrap our brain around how to handle people differently. And, you know, that's the one thing that comes from war. You learn a lot. If you choose to learn a lot, right? That's the difference. It's like you learn a lot if you choose to learn a lot. So things have changed. It's not the same when I was in as it is now.
Yeah. So when you're back in Canada, you're suicidal, you're medicated. How did you start to climb out of that cycle?
When I got to British Columbia, I was put under the treatment of a doctor named Dr. Greg Donald Passy. Dr. Passy is still my doctor to this day. I actually have treatment with him at 4:15. That's why I said that to you.
Oh, yeah.
I still see him weekly. He's been my doc since 11. And if it were not for him and my husband and their willingness and the fucking patience, man. Whew. Patience. So Dr. Passy is also a veteran. I believe he was a lieutenant colonel when he retired. He was a medic. He served during the Bosnia and Rwanda genocide. He's seen some shit, and he's an old man now. And that's when I got him, I respected him. It wasn't a doctor that came in to work with me. This was a veteran who had been through real shit who came in to work with me. So I was open to him, and I was open to him telling me we're going to make this better. I didn't believe him. I didn't believe him till recently. But it took a lot of work, and it took a lot of different treatments, a lot of different healing modalities. It took a lot of work on his part. It took a lot of work on my part. It took a lot of work on everyone around me, just holding strong and giving me a support system, because frankly, if one of those pillars cracked, that would have been it.
I saw on your Instagram you posted about TMS training, transcranial magnetic
RTMS. Yep.
RTMS. Is that the type of work that you're doing with Dr. Mark?
No. So Dr. Passy is a psychiatrist.
Okay.
So there's different types of things you can do there. Talk therapy was predominantly what we did. There's also EMDR. There's also brainwave neurofeedback and things like that you can do as well. Couple that with medication, physical fitness, art therapy. And, you know, I spread the gamut of just doing everything and trying all these things, right? The brain treatment, the RTMS, the one you're speaking of, I did just in March. So I had an undiagnosed traumatic brain injury that literally went undiagnosed till March of this year. And, you know, we got to a point with the PTS treatment and what we were working on, and I was plateauing, and I was actually regressing in a lot of ways. And so when I got the opportunity to go down to the Resiliency Brain Center in Coppell, Texas, funded by Defenders of Freedom, I was able to actually work on the TBI, symptoms and issues. So that's where they did RTMS. That's one of the tools that they utilize, as well as plenty of other things, you know, really working with your eyes. So vagal tone, you know, is one of the biggest things that helps a lot with taking cortisol down, because I used to live on cortisol, right? Just all the time. Yeah. That's just where I live. So learning a lot about that in the vestibular system, meaning your eyes, and how important your eyes are to whether you can be successful in life and what your eyes do. So learning pursuits and saccades, and learning, like I said, RTMS every day. And then
vagal tone is an eye movement training?
No, vagal tone is right in here, right?
Okay.
So right in your throat. So if you've got the I'm gonna fuck this up.
That's okay. I fuck a lot of things up.
No, it's okay. It's like there's a nerve that runs along there.
I can look it up real quick.
Yeah, and it brings you down. So there's these things, exercises you can do. So like singing. That's why singing sometimes when you've had a head injury, it makes you feel good. It's because it vibrates and it causes your cortisol to lower.
It says it's the vagal tone is the activity of the vagus nerve, the 10th cranial nerve, and fundamental component of the parasympathetic branch.
That nervous system.
Of the autonomic nervous system. There
Correct.
We go.
So when you're able to lower that and bring it down, then your cortisol comes down with that. So learning all these tips and tricks. So like another thing you can do if you find yourself spiking is gargle water really aggressively, right? So there's things like that and tips and tricks. Also things like your eyes, like there's these things called pursuits and saccades. So take like a pen and you put like a stick or a spot on it. Put your eyes straight at it. And what you want to do is you want to move your hand, right? And you have your eyes follow. Because what happens is a lot of people, their eyes shake. So if you ever meditate and you close your eyes, some people's eyes shake. Well, there's testing to look at that and figure out. So if you've had a head injury or you've had, what they understand now is you can just hit your head like that, and that can trigger a TBI result. So there's a ton of research, but if you give a look to the Resiliency Brain Center in Coppell, Texas, Dr. Charlene Godet and Michelle Eisenman, they are miracle workers. They are impressive to say the least, but I no longer struggle with vertigo, car sickness, migraines, stomach and digestive issues, and balance issues because of the treatment I did with them.
If I may, I'd like to read part of an Instagram caption of yours just to give people a small slice. I'm gonna read it back to you. I hate reading my own writing, so this is just, I like to inflict pain upon my guests, so this is the way that I do it. This is what gets me off.
I'm here for it.
Yeah. So you write, vulnerability. I preach it, I scream it, because without it we cannot heal. This past 2 years has been a roller coaster of learning, healing, and changing. I learned that I had TBI. Well, my husband and I both. I watched my husband slowly circle the drain as he slipped away. I had no idea why he was drowning until some friends began to help us understand head injuries. By way of combat flip-flops, as usual, our friend Ron Rafico introduced us to Defenders of Freedom and Resiliency Brain Health. Canadian healthcare wasn't doing anything. They would send us home after several visits to the ER and say we were fine and try to give us pills. They were more concerned about COVID than those who were slowly dying of anything else. Truth to be told, we weren't fine. We were both getting worse as the days passed on. I sent a voice message crying and pleading for anyone to help us. It took 1 week once I called Ron Rafico and Brady. It took 1 week once I called Ron Rafico, and Brady was in Texas doing treatment with some of the most incredible human beings I've ever had the privilege to meet. These brilliant doctors who took the time to hear our issues, understand, and once they did, that's when the healing began. So that intermingles with a lot of the things you were talking about, like the different types of training, vagal training, eyes, the transcranial, like all of that was going on around the same time.
Yeah, so that's the program they run you through. So what was happening was like I had low-grade migraines. I still had anger issues. Like it for no reason I couldn't control it and I couldn't figure it out. I couldn't be in a car. I'd get car sick anytime anyone drove, like violently. Light sensitivity is a huge sign too. So like I couldn't, even if I had sunglasses on inside, my eyes would still pour. So these were all signs and symptoms. And I just thought this was normal. The reason my husband went before me is because my husband was a professional supercross racer. And last year out of nowhere, he dropped, last August 5th, he dropped out of nowhere and almost died on me. And it was from his body shutting down from TBIs that went undiagnosed. He really did circle the drain. He was bedbound and he was suicidal. And it was horrific to watch my, professional athlete, badass CEO, incredible husband just wither away in front of me. And that's when I reached out for help. And they took him as well. So they took him first because they know I wouldn't go until he was gone. And so they took him. And then they took me the 2 weeks after, right after. And Defenders of Freedom paid for me to go. They're a veteran charity and they send people down to get brain treatment. And I was really grateful for them for that, for all of them.
So you had the TBI from the artillery explosions, just like everything you had overseas. And then your husband had it from Supercross at the same time, which is the motorbikes dirt racing,
Yeah, the
like they're
yeah,
path
so
racing.
like
Okay.
yeah, like the motorcycles inside the
Okay.
stadiums, you see the big Monster Energy,
Yeah.
those big yeah, so that's what he used to do for a living, and he stopped racing in 2010. So he hadn't had a major head hit since then. But the long-term damage that TBIs, they don't often show up right away. They quite often show up a lot later on, and people don't know why they're feeling the way they're feeling. But hormonally, your hormones drop, your blood's a mess, things can just get completely out of whack. And when you went to this treatment facility, the first thing they do is look at your blood and they go, okay, this is how we can fix this. And this is how we're going to do it. And you walk in and they're pretty calm about it. They're like,
Yeah.
yeah, we can fix this.
Yeah, it's not a common thing really with baseball, so I didn't start reading about it until it started becoming more open in football, and a lot of my friends play
CTE.
football in college. Yeah, CTE, other types of brain injuries, and just some of the things I would read where you have guys coming out of the NFL at 28 years old and they have the brain of like a 65-year-old because of all the damage and neural pathways destroyed. And a lot of times guys who
Frontal
don't,
lobe shuts down.
yeah, frontal lobe shuts down. And a lot of times it's not the positions you would think. Like you'd think the linebackers and the linemen are the ones taking the brunt of it. But even just, getting decked as a wide receiver, quarterbacks taking hits constantly, like there's not really a way to escape. And the changes, yeah, I was reading some of the same things. Like it doesn't happen immediately. You can function for a relatively long time, depending on how bad it is and how sharp the injury is. But then over time, you just start to become this unrecognizable form of yourself.
And that's exactly what happens. And then you don't often know why it's happening. And then the doctors don't know what's happening. So then they don't treat it because they don't know what's happening. They think it's psychological. So they give you medication for depressants. But really, that's not what the problem is.
Yeah.
So it can be a very vicious cycle. But fortunately, we have doctors out there. I think Wave Neuro in California, there's a lot of doctors. There's a treatment facility in Vancouver now that my husband's actually today. He's just doing follow-up treatment there. There is ways that you can improve this. You don't have to live like this. There are resources. You just have to seek them out. And fortunately, I had enough of a support network that I reached out to some special operators who were willing to help me out.
As we start to wrap up, can you tell the story of Brass and Unity? And because I want people to check it out. And the Commanders, the sunglasses are sick. I need to pick up a pair of the Commander 2.0s. Those are my vibe. But can you please tell the story of how that came together.
Well, first off, if you're listening to this between the November 15th and December 1st, we have our Black Friday 40% off sale. So you're going to want to grab those now.
Go get it.
If I were you. And it's just Black Friday 40. So go grab those. So Brass and Unity started in 2015, incorporated in 2016. And it was suggestion of art therapy from Dr. Passy. He said, anything, doesn't matter. You could draw, you can paint, do whatever you want. Somebody told me that crystals can heal people. And I was so desperate to heal literally anything and just to have some pain. So I went and bought myself some beads and some little pliers. And then I called a few friends and my husband was like, why don't you get some casings involved here? And I was like, okay. So I called some friends and just took a bunch of stuff, absolutely destroyed a kitchen table, hammered and drilled and just pounded down stuff and wire wrapped and was just making like madness. And a friend saw it and suggested I sell it and was like, I'd like to buy one. And they bought one. And then somebody else bought one. And then my husband said to me one day, I think this could be something if you want it to be, and I'll help you do it. So he did just that. We learned everything about the fashion industry possible, line sheets, fucking photos, websites, SKUs, all of the stuff. How do you sell it to a retailer? Okay, well, now you got to figure out how to cold call stores. So I'd start knocking on doors and started selling my product. It originally was named Her Wearables. And then Kevin Hart, I was fortunate enough to meet him. He gave me an idea. My mom was a truck my mom was a truck driver for one of his tours, and my mom would harass him and say, you should meet my daughter. And then finally he caved.
As the
because
good mother should.
My mother is persistent, to say the least. And he met with me in Vancouver, and it was just my mom, myself, and him and one of his dudes. And he opened it and he said, I really like it, but why does it say her wearables? And I was like, I don't know. I'm just trying to start this thing. And he's like, well, if you want guys to wear it, why would you call it that? And I was like, that's a good point. He's like, you should think about the name. So we went home, and then he tweeted it out to 24 million or 26 million people that he had. This was before Kevin Hart popped like he is now. And
that's how you know how big Kevin Hart is. At 24 million is pre-pop.
That's pre-pop.
Yeah, I was
He
just
was
like
big,
casually
but, like,
doing it. 24 mil,
But I
like
mean,
whatever.
look at him now, though.
Yeah, he's
My
like
God,
100
look at him
something.
now.
Crazy, but
Oh. So we took it seriously, and my husband and I went home, and my husband started brainstorming because he's really the smart one in this side. And he's like, what about brass and unity? And I was like, I like it. So we incorporated in 2016 as brass and unity. And within not even 2 years, I was at a trade show and fortunately met somebody at a dinner who saw bullet bracelets on my wrist, and was like, hey, I've got some friends that would probably like to partner with with somebody like you for their charity. Cut to 2017, we were on Ellen with Beth Bears and Julianne Hough and Michael Bublé, Jesse Tyler Ferguson, Whitney Cummings, and all these people were wearing Brass and Unity. And we've been able to help a lot of organizations. Excuse me. We've donated over $500,000, and we donate 20% of our net proceeds to veteran organizations all over the world. And my whole thing is I'm just a vehicle to put the money in the hands of the people doing the hard work. I just want my friends to stay alive. One of the stats that we just recently got that released was it's no longer 22 soldiers a day or veterans kill themselves every day or die by suicide. Sorry, I misspoke. That's changed as well. We're now losing 44 are dying by suicide a day.
44 per day.
So my whole job in this world is to try to raise awareness and let people know that you can heal from this, that you can get better, that there is supports, there are organizations, and that's what I do. So we work really hard to fund organizations and try to be supportive to those. And some of the really great ones out there, Honor House, Heroic Hearts Project, Vet Solutions, Defenders of Freedom, the Boot Campaign, Warrior Angel Foundation, Kirstie Ennis Foundation, One More Wave. There's a ton of organizations out there that go the distance. I said Defenders of Freedom, right? Just double check.
Yes.
But these guys go the distance, and they help people like me when no one else can. So that's what Brass and Unity does. We are a for-profit, but we are a functional company where we help people with our products, and then we donate the proceeds.
And that's brassandunity.com. People can go check it out.
Absolutely. And then July 11th and on early pre-sale starting in January will be my book called Brass and Unity as well. And that'll be coming out next year. And we'll be doing a full-on book tour for that as well.
Amazing. Well, I have the Commander sunglasses written down to go pick up. I will definitely be doing that. And I encourage other people to surf as well and go find their piece from there, because it is really cool stuff.
Thank you. I do appreciate it. I always recommend if you're going to get anything and you're not sure, go grab the Buddy Check, which is this rope guy here. And this one is just a 338 casing cut down. They come in a pack of 2. You wear one and you give it to a buddy and you let them know that they can call you anytime and that you've got their back and that you're there for them.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much, Kelsi. Is there any other place that people should go check you out? I know you're on Instagram. You have the podcast as well.
Yeah, we have the Brass and Unity podcast, which comes out weekly, soon to be twice a week, where we talk to special operators, actors, Fortune 500 professional athletes, and we talk about all things, all the way down to sometimes the first time someone's killed someone, all the way to the greatest moments of their life. Yeah. And we get people to be vulnerable. So go check them all out. And anything else you can pretty much find on our Instagram, Kelsi_Sheren or Brass and Unity, and we answer everywhere.
Kelsi Sheren, thank you so much.